think we'll get started. And then while we wait for more people to join us, I think we have people joining us from multiple time zones. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening from where you're joining. I am Binny Matthews. I'm one of the co-founders of ProjectPro. We have with us today Ana. Totally honored to have Ana with us today. Ana's been a data scientist for almost over 6 years. More recently, Ana's currently a data scientist with Lyft. She lives in San Francisco Bay Area. She's been with Lyft for almost 2 years. Before Lyft, Ana was a data scientist with Uber for over 4 years. Before that, she was with Liblaria Cultura, and then before that with Bain and Company. As you know from the topic of the webinar, we're going to hear all about how Ana kind of molded her career and became a senior data scientist at two of probably the world's leading companies that use data and data science to kind of scale their businesses, Uber and Lyft. So we're going to hear all about that. And I'm also happy to know that Ana is also one of our project experts at ProjectPro, where she's on our panel of project experts releasing projects on our platform. And ProjectPro, for those of you who don't know, is the world's first end-to-end data science and big data projects platform, where we partner with industry experts to release real business projects with solutions and code on our platform. That's what we do at ProjectPro. So the format for this webinar is I will start with a few questions, and then some of you have already submitted a few questions. We will take those, and then if we miss out anything, feel free to type those on the chat, and then we'll pick some of those questions. Thanks, Ana, once again. Thanks for joining us. So, Ana, we would love to learn, how did you decide, or when did you decide you want to be a data scientist? Was that one moment in time, or did that gradually happen?
Sure. First of all, hi, Binny, and hi, everyone. I'm so excited to have everybody, a lot of people here. It's nice to meet you all. Hopefully this will be fun, and I'm able to convey a thing or two. Thanks for introducing me, Binny, as well. So I think for me, my background is econ, and I am born and raised and educated in Brazil. That's where I did most of my career. I started actually working in economic consulting, and when I was in Bain, I was also doing consulting in general. And there was a particular project in Bain where we had to kind of tabulate all data of municipalities in Brazil to get demographic data and do some sort of correlation. And I was a very junior employee, so I was responsible for doing that. And then I tabulated the data, and I was told to find insights in the data. And I was like, okay, how do I do that? I was very junior, and you just use a bunch of graphs and just find patterns. And I remember back then, I was thinking like, what graphs am I supposed to do, and what are the patterns? And back in my school, they were like starting this new exciting thing that was called data science. This was almost like 10 years ago, and there were people doing some sort of cool things with R back then. So I was like, what's that? And back then I built my first decision tree. I remember it till this day. There was a particular variable that we were trying to do. And I thought it was fascinating. I was like, wow, this is so smart. We let the computer work for us. So that was a moment that I said, like, it doesn't really make sense to build graphs and find patterns. I need to learn more about that. So that's when I started like my journey to learn and eventually become a data scientist.
Very interesting. And do you recall, just going back to your days at Bain, I assume you were kind of an analyst there when you started off. And when you tried to build this decision tree, do you remember what were those early resources that you relied on to help you and to learn and to get there?
Yeah, absolutely. I think back then, there wasn't really, especially in Brazil where I'm from, there's not really, education and courses like it, and even things like ProjectPro that had this whole coursework. So I remember meeting up with these folks in university that were studying a few papers and etc. And they could point me out to a few blogs online that had this coding hour and etc. So it was very scrappy. Eventually, you know, I ended up with like more formal resources, things like the elements of statistical learning, like books and etc. That came later, but back then it was like just something very scrappy and unromantic of just like discovering and thinking, wow, this is super interesting.
Okay, and one of the very interesting things about your background, Anna, is that you really don't have any formal education in data science, right? I think there's quite a few people on the call here today who want to know that I don't have a master's in computer science or AI or ML. How do I compete with people who have a postgraduate degree in this area, and how do I get a job?
Yeah,
how did you go
absolutely.
about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think like one of the main things that the industry values is, of course, like the background and education and training, not necessarily because of the training per se, but more because of the knowledge that you have. But I'd say like experience and having solved these problems is equally important. So when I was making my transition from like, I was working in an e-commerce after I worked in consulting. And when I was actually applying for Uber, one of the things that I realized was that I had been doing data science work in spite of not having the title, in spite of this company's not having, you know, the focus or like the role of like a data scientist, right? But I had been implementing classification models. I had been implementing regressive approach. I had been doing these things. And I was able throughout the interview process to show that I have the fundamentals. My econ background gave me the statistics knowledge, and then I could show that I could implement these things. But even nowadays, at Lyft, we are actually designing an apprenticeship program in data science that is targeted to folks that do not have a traditional background, right? I have econ, and it's kind of like a pretty, like it's easy to make the leap to data science, but there are some folks that have, you know, psychology, arts, and etc. And companies are now even considering that, like, if you have the knowledge and if you have like the practice, why not? Why couldn't you join? So I think it's totally doable.
Okay, so it's just getting your hands dirty, doing stuff. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, that's very helpful. And see, that leads me to another question. Okay, Anna. See, for over the last 2 years of running ProjectPro, right? We have spoken to like thousands of potential developers who want to be data scientists. And one of the things I've heard a lot is people tell me, if only I could get the interview, I can convince them and I can do this, but I'm not able to get the interview. So so do you have any tips to answer that question? I mean, how do people get their foot in the door?
Yeah, absolutely. I think like there's no sugarcoating that if you are coming from a completely different career, right? Let's say that you have been in sales for like 15 years and you don't have any practical experience in data science. Sometimes it's hard to get that first interview, even when you don't have like the knowledge. There are a couple of like shortcuts that you can take. Some people that I've seen are successful. Some people do those coding boot camps. Like sometimes they have the knowledge, but the coding boot camps put them in contact with the network. Some people do some code leads on LinkedIn. I receive a lot of that, of folks saying like, hey, this is my GitHub portfolio. I've never worked in this. Like, would you be willing to refer me? Some people go through this apprenticeship programs in companies, and some people do something that I think is interesting. They join a tech company that has a data science org in their field, in their role. And then eventually they are able to internally transfer, because an internal transfer, you have like already the company knowledge, and sometimes you have internal programs for that. It's just like it just takes a little bit longer, but it's possible, absolutely.
Okay, that's pretty insightful. You're saying the first step would be to kind of search around inside your current company to see if you can do internal projects as a first step to that. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, that's helpful. I guess the inevitable question: what was Uber like? Your 4 years in Uber, as a company, your experience there, yeah.
I think it's well, I think culturally, I think there's a lot on the media out there about like how Uber is like.
I almost mean, Anna, like from a data science perspective, right? So it's almost a dream job for practically anybody to work. Yeah.
So one thing that is fascinating about Uber and Lyft and any marketplace companies, that they really have very difficult data science problems in all directions and all types, right? So if you like optimization, you can find like several teams that are focused solely on optimizing a particular part of that, the dispatch or the marketplace and etc. And this is super, it's super cool, right?
Yeah,
but if you're more focused on marketing science, you also have like a lot of teams doing that. And if you're more like product science, so one thing that is super cool is that you have a lot of possibilities. But the second thing that I personally like a lot about ride sharing in comparison to other things like Facebook, etc., it's a very tough business. The margins are very low. So the problems are tough to solve. The stakes are high because it's not like there is like a lot of money to lose. It's not like, we can make a huge mistake and it's fine.
Right.
So that kind of creates like an environment that is pretty cool for a scientist. You always have very challenging stuff.
Right. No, that's a very interesting point, which is, unlike many other companies, data science is not like an afterthought. It's kind of core to the business because you're trying to kind of squeeze a penny from every ride out there, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So that brings me to another question, Ana, which is, previously you spoke about to get your foot in the door, try to do some projects, put them out there, get some hands-on experience. How are those projects different from what you do inside an Uber, inside a Lyft? Is it just the complexity of the data set, or what else is different?
I think like the main difference in working inside a data science organization versus a non-data science organization is the process, right? So I think like the way that you do things in the data science org is much more structured and principled. So there is like a lot of time and resources spent on like feature engineering, right? And building this iteratively over time with several teams. There is a lot of time spent on peer reviews and sharing your ideas, your codes, and etc. with other people before you actually do an implementation. And then once you do that, especially when you're talking about modeling implementations, there's the whole part with engineering of like, packaging that model, implementing that in live, in production, and etc. And not to mention, one thing that is difficult to find outside science organizations is the experimentation piece. One of the main things of the science job is actually doing experiments, A/B experiments, banded, you name it, all types of experiments. And that is something that usually you don't find outside data science organizations.
Interesting. So one is, the first difference you're basically saying is that you're not just interacting with the code, you're interacting with people as well, right? Exactly. So that's the process. The second thing is the deployment aspect of it. And the third is the experimentation kind of mindset. Okay, very, very interesting. And you probably have interviewed hundreds of people for jobs at Uber and Lyft, right? What do you look for? What are like those 3 filters that you look for in a candidate when you interview them?
Yeah, I think like there is a table stakes thing that I always look for, that is the technical fundamentals, right? Do you know statistics? Do you know coding, right? Do you know SQL, right, to extract data, right? And those are the basics for me. And usually we have like specific screenings only to target that. So by the time I interview, the person cleared those. Personally, for me, the main thing that I look for is this person able to learn new things, right? And how fast they learn, right? So I'll give you an example. I had times in my career what I said, like, we need to do this, and maybe we should use this type of model or technology or etc. And I had scientists that were like, well, I'm not super familiar with that, so I won't do it. In a company that is like Uber, Lyft, and they have very complex problems, everything is evolving, like we cannot afford that. I cannot afford someone saying, oh, sorry, I didn't take a class at school on blah, 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 so I cannot do it, right? So I always look for like, do you have the fundamentals that allow you to learn something new, and how fast you learn? And are you bold enough to try to do something that you didn't do before, and maybe like look for expert advice and bring other people in the field? So that for me is very important, is the ability to try something new and learn fast.
Okay. And if I may ask, how do you gauge that in an interview? Like, how do you look for that?
So there are a couple of things that that I think are interesting. One is when you ask somebody to talk about a project, right? And usually people come prepared, right? They have like 2 or 3 examples of a project, and they walk you through end to end. Something that I personally like to do is make an introduction on the project and say like, okay, you went down this route, why not that other route, right? And then one thing that I noticed is that most people, they think I am kind of testing them and they try to answer correctly. They think like I'm saying, oh, this is some sort of like a curveball and I'm gonna get the answer right. But what I'm trying to do is having a debate. That's what I'm trying to do, right? So the other day, someone was talking about a logistic regression and how they use the coefficients to build the weights or whatever. And I said, well, but why didn't you use, let's say, tree-based models and feature importance? And the person kind of like shut down saying, no, this is wrong because of that. Mm-hmm. But what I was expecting is actually a debate, right? I was expecting like, maybe those are the pros of doing what you're saying. I chose this route, right? So for me, someone that can only talk about a particular method that they studied and over-studied, that shows to me that you are not necessarily open to learning new things, right? What happens with, like, you are in an environment with like 200 scientists, you show your code to someone, there will be someone out there that's going to say, have you tried this? Mm-hmm. And most likely you have never heard from it because people are super smart. Are you capable of saying, no, tell me more about it? What does it do? Maybe I can try it out. Maybe you have a better result. If you're not, then you're just going to be like repeating the same thing. And then I don't get innovation.
That makes a lot of sense. Okay. Thank you. And just, kind of corollary to that, what do you see missing in people when you kind of interview them?
There are a couple of things. I think one of the things for me is it's actually part of the scorecards that we have to fill in interviews is like, is the person able to see limitations in the methods that they propose, right? So again, usually people come with a case and they say, I did this, and they tell like a perfectly beautiful story. So I did this, the data set was perfect, the features are perfect, was all good. They don't tell us the shortcomings, and they are not usually transparent that, maybe model V0 was bad and model V1 wasn't even that good, right? Because they want to impress. And for me, I find it much more fascinating when the person is able to see the shortcomings and say like, this maybe wasn't going to work. I went down this route. I tried these other things. The second thing, and connected to that, is the part of the debate that I was saying, especially in panel interview. There are many people ask questions, why not going to this route? And instead of like engaging with the interviewer, because that's what they're going to be doing on the day-to-day, as I was saying. You're going to be talking to people and saying, we experimented A/B, why didn't you do banded? Or maybe if you're not able to show that in an interview, then what tells me that you're going to be able to do that on the day-to-day?
Very interesting. And, one of the things I gather from what this seems to be a common thread, and just, correct me if I'm wrong, which is being able to stand up for their arguments when being pushed back, being able to justify, being able to listen to another point of view, make a counter argument, and also kind of understand the pros and cons of their approach and things like that. See, a lot of that goes back to confidence in that person, right? Only if that person is reasonably confident are they going to hold their argument, push back, be kind of intellectually honest about it. And what is the best way for people on this call today to build this confidence? Is it just do more projects? Is that where the confidence comes from?
I think I personally believe in the power of vulnerability and the I don't know. So I think like getting comfortable with saying, I don't know, I am not aware. Again, I've been doing data science formally for 6 years, but most of my career I've been working with data. And up until this day, I have direct reports coming to me and saying, I'm going to use this, and never heard of it. Like, can you tell me more about it, right? And I think like I am only able to do that because I learned over time to do that a lot. It's okay to say, I don't know, I'm not aware, I'm not familiar. Actually, even in interviews is okay. One of the questions that I got asked in my panel when I was presenting a case that I had done in the past, a model that I developed, one of the interviewers asked me, have you thought about this reinforcement learning approach? And I was like, I'm not familiar with this. It's interesting. And he briefly talked, like he briefly lectured me on this, but and actually there was no problem at all. It shows again this intellectual honesty, right? It is very unreasonable to think that someone will know all the data science methods, will have implemented everything, will have a portfolio that ranges from reinforcement learning to I don't know, to classification or whatever. Like it's just not going to happen, right? There will be many things you don't know, and you need to be comfortable with that.
That's a terrific point. Just showing vulnerability to build some trust, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. Okay. It shows like if you're able to be vulnerable, I can see that you can learn, and that's very nice.
Okay. So, just to summarize, I mean, we've covered a lot of ground right now on the technical aspects of kind of being a data scientist. Do you recall some non-obvious thing you did early in your career to get that foot into the door? Because the kind of companies you worked in are like world-class, super difficult to get in. Something non-technical, something that falls in the bucket of hustler. Have you done something there?
Absolutely.
Yeah, okay.
Absolutely. This is the world, the word that I live by up until this day, managing large teams and etc. For me, hustle is very important. And in the way, my version of hustle is having this courage to try something that I haven't been formally trained to do or have never done before responsibly, right? So there were many times at Uber when I was given problems that I had never done before. And I researched and I tapped into, academic references, even less prestigious references sometimes. And I gave a shot. I tried. And I presented that, of course, to a group of scientists that were like experts and could say, hey, is this completely off? With the intent of actually saying, can I carry this project through the end? Maybe we should pass this along to this group of super experts. Both things happen, right? I had instances where I did something and I talked to an expert and they were like, you're on the right track. I think yeah, just take it through the end. There were instances where they were like, our team can do this. And then I passed that along, right? So I think I see a lot of hesitation on folks on I will not do this because I have never done this. I'm not formally trained. I'm not. And I think it's super important, just give it a shot. Give it a shot. Yeah. And if it's all wrong, and talk to an expert, of course, validate your solution. But even if it's super wrong, you learn something. And if it's halfway right, you're gonna feel so good. And this gives you a lot of flexibility. At Uber, I worked in several different problems because I am more like a flexible type of scientist. I'm less of an ML engineer, super focused on one area. I'm more like a generalist in the field. So for me, that was what worked.
Being flexible. Being flexible, kind of ambitious and flexible kind of at the same time, right?
Yeah.
Okay, great. And I'm going to take one of the questions that came during the session. So someone wanted to know, I am a regular software engineer right now, software developer. How do I move my career to becoming a data scientist? Yeah,
that's a super interesting question. I think for anyone in any career path, to be a data scientist, essentially you need the technology skills like coding and etc. Most scientists I know of coding Python, but there are some folks that only do R, especially on the marketing science things. Folks seem to prefer R. There are some more interesting packages for that. But in any case, there is the coding aspect, which I think as a software engineer, you'll probably have that already. The second aspect is the math and statistic behind that, right? We see a lot of implementation of packages and etc. And it's absolutely fine. The project that I do on ProjectPro is all on the package, but you need to know what is behind that and what is the package doing the math and the optimization and etc. And the third aspect is this aspect of people that I was talking about. How do you work in a science community? And how do you work with other scientists? How do you develop a science project, right? So as a software engineer, as anyone, if you develop the technical skills and of course the math and statistics skills, then comes the part of getting a job that allows you to actually, have this science community. Internal transfers in a company usually are the easiest path because they know already your work, etc. And sometimes you can make an intermediary leap with roles like data analytics or some roles are insights, or which are essentially doing a lot of data science work with the exception of experimentation. But from those roles to science, it's also much easier.
Understood. Got it. Okay. There was another question from someone who's interested in going into marketing analytics. And they wanted to know, what are the key skill areas I need to develop in marketing analytics over the next 10 years? I mean, I think you started off in marketing analytics, so would love to hear your thoughts on that. Yeah.
Yeah. I have been away from marketing analytics for a while now, but I do believe this is still valid. Companies have invested a lot in marketing analytics over the past years, right? Especially in performance marketing. So like budget optimization, how much money I should spend on each marketing channel. And then even like campaign optimization, keyword optimization, things like that. There are a lot of like work already developed on that.
Yeah.
Something that is adjacent to that is all the attribution work. So like, how do you attribute to this channel? How do I know which person came from that, right? So usually marketing analytics, as far as I know, is very much connected to this performance marketing. But there's another field of marketing in general, which is currently dominated by research, which is the part of like consumer data and understanding, right? So the classic is you go to these companies and they hire this Nielsen or whatever big company to do a survey with 2,000 people and profile them and kind of like come up with clusters of customers based on research. No offense, I do think it's important, but it's a pretty 90-80 thing to do, right? You can do a lot with like data. And I think this is an opportunity. I would say, like in my personal opinion, I think the performance marketing field is like very well developed, and companies are, very good at that, especially with big companies. But small companies, like sometimes they're building that. So attribution models, optimization, campaign optimization, channel optimization. But there is this other part, right, of like consumer insights that I think is something that still needs to be more developed and become more mainstream.
Well, I mean, to the audience here, if you have questions for Ana, we can probably take 2 questions, so feel free to type it on the chat. And Ana, while those questions come in, I had one question of my own. See, as you're familiar at ProjectPro, right? Hundreds of people come to us every month. And one of the reasons they come is they kind of want to change their career from whatever they're doing in data science. And then they look at this library of projects we have with the solved code to get some exposure to these enterprise grade projects. Now, one of the questions I personally hear from them is, I have 12 years experience as a business analyst or a data warehouse engineer, and I want to become a data scientist. Am I going to start as a fresher, a junior? Do I have to take a pay cut? How do I make the transition at the same level?
I would say it really, like, this is one where it really depends on the person, the skill level, and the types of things, right? Let's take, for example, a business analyst that has been for the past 12 years working in Tableau doing dashboards, right? If you take a look at the stack of like technology and skills that a scientist needs to have, dashboarding, sometimes it's super. There are some companies that scientists don't even do dashboarding, but let's take, for the sake of example, like they do dashboarding and it's important, but there's still a lot of other skills that this person hasn't really tested and tried. So in this case, probably there needs to be some sort of like step back to kind of like, get started on things. I've seen some people doing that transition on the management level. So they are managing business analysts, they become managers of certain types of scientists, or like a hybrid science and analytics team. And that allows them to do that transition. But let's say that you are a business analyst that, you have the dashboarding, you did experimentation, you did, in many companies, at Lyft, for example, analysts do all of these things, except for a few things that only scientists do. Then the transition is much easier, and you can expect to be at a similar level, provided that you show the other skills, right?
Understood. Got it. We have one question from Adil. Adil wants to know, how much probability and statistics background do I need to have to be a data scientist?
That is pretty important. That is the crux of like being a scientist, and that's like one of the differences between the analyst world versus the scientist is the ability to follow like the scientific method of validation, of hypothesis testing, and etc. And for all of that, you absolutely need statistics and probability, right? I would say one thing that people think is that you need to know in depth machine learning, etc. I'd say that depends on the type of scientist that you want to be. There are scientists that are super focused on optimization and machine learning, and even on that you have fields, right? You have folks of optimization, you have folks of something of other things, right? I mean, optimization in my mind. So it depends on the area that you want to go, but probability and statistics is crucial.
Okay. Muthu has a question where he says he's got a background in he's not got a background in he's got a background in finance, wants to move into data science. He's done a course. How does he do it? No programming background.
With a no programming background or with programming background? Sorry.
No programming background.
Okay, got it. Yeah, so I would say, like, again, the programming part of data science is essentially the ability to execute all of these models and whatever ideas, right? One thing that is interesting that you have a background in finance. There are several companies that have like this more like financial analytics role that works closely with data science. Lyft is one of them. Like, I have financial analysts that work closely with us for things, for example, customer lifetime value model, right? This is a modeling approach, right? Or even forecasting of revenue, whatever, right? And I'd say, like, if you start like working in companies or projects that have this bias for modeling, forecasting, you can start building up a portfolio, and then from then you can transition either to an analyst role or to a science role, depending on the company and your skill level.
Understood. Okay. Omer has a question on AutoML. Where does the role of AutoML stop and where does the data scientist start? I mean, like, how do these two things coexist in the future?
Yeah, absolutely. I love that question. I think, like, in the beginning, when I started doing data science long ago, data science was about like the person that knows how to implement that model, and you know that there was a lot of the emphasis on the coding and the language and etc. Now, to be honest, like you go to the Python directory and you have so many libraries that already do the work for you, and anyone can write like 5 lines of code and the thing is ready, right? Mm-hmm. But the role of data scientists is becoming more about like developing the systems and processes and a scientific method of validation of something. And the computer can code everything, and you can just like press a button, but designing the experiment, thinking about that is the role of a scientist. I think, like, on the ML world, the role of a scientist become actually developing new methods, developing new algorithms. So Uber and Lyft, they have like large teams of folks that are actually focusing on how do I develop new techniques of experimentation? How do I develop new ways of testing and assembling models, right? That are not like the packaged one, right? And I'd say the third thing is I am seeing more and more in the companies, companies requiring scientists to be more business oriented and to be closer, even closer to product managers. So it's not enough only to know the code and to know how to formulate a hypothesis and validate it. Can you actually drive business impact? Can you actually say, those are the things we need to learn and know, and therefore, since we know this is the direction of the business. So definitely less about like coding and the machine's going to do that, but more about like the thinking part of it.
Understood. Got it. So, just a follow-up question on that, Anna, which is, in most areas of software development, right? If you take web development or mobile development, there are these auto click, drag, drop, I can build a website kind of tools out there. Right, and they all kind of play a very, very small role. Bulk of the work is still done by real developers who build things from scratch. And do you think that's how data science is going to play out? AutoML will be a very similar Wix.com kind of small role, or do you think AutoML will have a much larger role?
I think I always tend to bet on technology to do things better than humans. And I have seen both at Uber and Lyft and other companies where my friends work, a lot of like internal efforts in developing this AutoML tools internally as a proprietary technology, right? To do the things faster, more efficient. And there are a bunch of SaaS solutions doing these things out there. So again, like if I were to start a career in data science right now, I would absolutely invest in this part of the thinking of like understanding the principles, so then I can build new methods. I would be creative about implementing these methods in my projects, right? Why do only one model if I can do 3 and assemble them in a clever way? Why do I don't assemble them with my own methodology? Why don't I try these things? So I would be focusing more on the thinking part for sure. I personally tend to bet a lot on technology.
Okay. Do you have time for one last question? I know we said 30 minutes. We are already at 40 minutes.
One last question. All right. Yeah.
Okay, so Dave has a question, which is, it has to do with this. You look right now, MLOps is everywhere. Are you seeing an MLOps engineer as a new role coming out, or are data scientists expected to be the MLOps person as well?
Oh, that is an interesting one. So I have seen companies where data science does. I just hired someone that was a data scientist that was actually an MLOps, an ML engineer, a data engineer, and a scientist, and maybe a product manager. So it was like he was doing everything. At Lyft, the data science sits within the data and machine learning orgs, and they are separate organizations. So you have like this thing creating. I'd say like at this point, the industry is still experimenting and trying to figure it out. And I see definitely like a few types of roles emerging. Back when I joined and when I started data science, it's like you had like a data scientist, but now we're talking like algorithms data scientists, and there are this product/decision data scientists. So there is more specialization coming along. So I think like probably MLOps is going to be something that is going to be a role in itself in the near future. But I still think like companies are trying to figure it out the best way to do it.
Okay, great. Well, Ana, thank you so much. This has been fantastic.
That's been fun. Thank you.
Yeah. Tons of very tangible, actionable advice. Well, I mean, even personally for me, I think I heard more life advice here than data science advice. Be flexible, be ambitious, be vulnerable. So I think as an entrepreneur, it helps me as well, advice like that. So thank you so much once again.
Thank you all. And if I may say one last thing, like Lyft is hiring a ton. We need a ton of data scientists. So if you are interested, and I guess like Bini, you guys sharing my LinkedIn content, I would be more than happy to see a resume, because we're definitely hiring.
Thank you. We'll certainly send some your way.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ana. Stay safe. Have a nice day.
Bye.
Bye.